morning, good afternoon, good evening, colleagues. We are very glad to welcome you all on this today webinar, Clean Cooking Schools. This is our fourth session in the webinar series organized by ESMAP, the Clean Cooking Fund team, and we're very happy to welcome you all here, and we're really happy to know and see our community is growing and being together for this webinar series. In our previous webinars, the team has already explored the clean cooking strategies, financing, business model, the challenges and opportunities specifically for e-cooking. And if you are looking for those topics, just let us know. We have been recording this session, so please take a look. This is recorded, and also there is the transcription of this section. So the idea is to create this material that we can share with our community and especially looking on how to operationalize and scale up clean cooking. And also, if there is any topic, any element on the scaling up and operationalization of clean cooking, please let us know. We are keeping building this series of webinar, and we are happy to integrate new topics on that. Today, we are turning this issue in a clean cooking. It's very cross-sectorial, and you know that it's between health, education, gender, climate, and clean cooking in schools. It's in the cross between education and energy, but also include all those elements. And this is part of a large effort of the World Bank side in aligning and cross-fertilizing and improve the impact in the intersection between energy, health, and education operations. In this context, I'm very glad to have Demetrius Papatanouzi, which is our Global Director for the World Bank on Energy and Extractive Global Department. Thank you for our open remarks. So thank you very much, Demetrius, to be here with us.
Thanks a lot, Michelle, and hello to everyone. Good evening if you're connecting from Asia, good afternoon in Africa and Europe, and good morning here in the Americas. It's the first time that we get an opportunity to focus on clean cooking in schools. So I'm particularly pleased that we're having this session today. And as Michelle said, we see clean cooking as an important part of the agenda for development for the World Bank, and it is related to how we support the creation of human capital, but also promoting cleaner, modern energy services for the populations where we work. So we estimate that every day about 500 million children receive a meal at school, every school day. And we know that in most of the low-income or middle-low-income countries, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, the main fuel for cooking at school is biomass, firewood, charcoal, sometimes kerosene. And schools are actually the world's second largest user of biomass fuels after households. Our estimate is that in sub-Saharan Africa, school kitchens burn every year about 8 million tons of firewood, and this would be equivalent to the emissions of more than 2 million cars. So clearly these emissions are harmful to the health of the population that is in the schools, the women that cook there, and they have negative impacts on gender and on human capital. Children are exposed to indoor pollution at the place where they learn, and that keeps on adding risks in the environment as forests are depleted. And as we know, it's mostly women and girls that have to spend the time to collect the biomass fuel. So we're focusing now under Mission 300 in the electrification of sub-Saharan Africa. And we also have made part of the energy compact that we have done with the countries where we work in, the agenda of clean cooking. And we feel that focusing on clean cooking at schools is a strategic entry point where we can improve access to electricity, we can work on gender equality, We can improve education outcomes and at the same time work on reducing
5292.
pollution and on climate mitigation. So today the team will discuss some of the proven processes, the business models, and lessons we have learned from implementing programs and projects that can be scaled up. It's an interesting approach and trying to see how we can really advance clean cooking in schools, and from that keep on extending our efforts into improving conditions in households. We feel that there's a role for the governments. Governments need to think about clean cooking in schools together with their energy planning process, together with their efforts on education. For all of us who work on development and our partners, we have to find a way to move from doing pilots into more programmatic ways of expanding clean cooking in schools. And for us in the World Bank, increasingly we're putting clean cooking as the center of the development agenda. And again, I'm really pleased that we're focusing now on schools and education and see whether this is the right entry point to expand clean cooking ideas for more and more people as we move ahead. Still, our estimate is that there is close to 2 billion people around the world that do not have access to clean cooking. So there's a formidable challenge ahead of us. But maybe with focusing more on what we can do at schools, we will create an additional approach to tackle this problem. So with this, thank you all very much for connecting. I see there's tens, maybe hundreds of people online now, and I'll pass it back to Michelle to take us to the rest of the program. Over to you, Michelle.
Thank you so much, Demetrius, for this welcome remarks. And we're very fortunate today to have very distinguished panelists that are actually doing that, actually implementing projects and moving the clean cooking on schools. And just so today, just to present our panelists, so we have Richard Sif from the Modern Energy Cooking Service MECS program that you present and guidelines for designing and implemented electric cooking solutions in schools. MECS goes from full implementation cycle, from assessment and planning to installation, usage, monitoring, and will highlight both challenge and pathway to scale. Then we have also Justine Abuga, with CEO of Ecobora. He'll share his operational experience deploying solar e-cooking systems in Kenyan schools. It's a very interesting experience for us. His approach combines technology, well-known in the World Bank operation, solar PV, lithium battery storage, and you see how it can be and how it's already being implemented. We look forward to hearing also about the business model, the private sector perspective, the system design, the potential job creation, and the on-ground lessons. Then we have Sarika Gupta, which is a senior economist in the Africa region. We will discuss the insights of the in-house World Bank operation, which includes ongoing work in Ghana, bringing clean cooking stoves to the country's school feeding program. So it's a very practical operational with a lot of lessons learned. We are very well glad to have Sarika with us. The Ghana School Feeding Program is the largest safety net program and plays a vital role in ensuring food security and nutrition for children among poorest and most vulnerable households in Ghana. So there's a very interesting experience that, and we see how this can be and what are the challenges for scale up. Then we have Clementina Umugwaneza, who is an energy specialist for East and Southern Africa. We will share the lessons from Rwanda, which is also a very innovative project, bringing clean cooking and on schools together with a much broader project of improving clean cooking. And Rwanda is always seen as a very exemplary on clean cooking and pushing the agenda and the challenge and how to solve the challenge in Rwanda. It's we hope that we will be learning a lot on that experience as well. Of course, that just a small introduction. I would like just to mention that when you talk about clean cooking in schools, we are talking about different kind of technologies. Here we have a few examples, and Richard, you'll be talking about e-cooking, which is one key technology. It's not the only solution, as you'll be seeing with the other colleagues. And I think what's very important of looking on the step by step, because of course there is some specificities on the technology itself, but it's very important to understand how it's actually implemented. And a lot of the lessons that we will be here on e-cooking from Richard today, it's also something that we need to consider when looking different technologies. So I welcome Richard to start the presentations. Thank you, Richard.
Thanks, Michelle. I'll just check that.
It's perfect. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Richard Seif. I work as a research associate for the Modern Energy Cooking Services Programme, and I'm also seconded for half my time to the UK government as a Modern Cooking Project Advisor for FCDO. Today I'll be talking about some recently developed MECS guidelines for designing and implementing electric cooking solutions in school settings. So just briefly a little bit about MECS. So MECS is the UK government's flagship programme on modern cooking, led by Loughborough University, ESMAP and CLASP, and the aim is to accelerate transitions to modern cooking. By modern cooking, that's meant it's a multi-fuel approach, including biogas, bioethanol, LPG as a transitional fuel, but the primary focus is on electric cooking. MECS currently has 11 priority countries, but has engaged and worked with many more. In terms of MECS work with school cooking transitions, broader institutional modern cooking transitions have been part of the MECS programme since the start in 2018. There's been various pieces of research, pilots, studies, etc. And a lot of these key findings were synthesised in a working paper in 2024 on the opportunities for commercial and institutional cooking. And that noted that there were particular opportunities within institutional e-cooking for school e-cooking, and those particular opportunities lay with schools, the compatibility with school cooking practices, so schools having simple menus, often involving batch cooking that aligned with available e-cooking appliances. That e-cooking also aligned with the electricity supply, and that school cooking typically takes place during the day and outside of peak electricity demand, so may place less of a burden on the grid supply. Also, opportunities were outlined by various sustainability benefits. So as you can see on the screen, including educational benefits and an potential awareness raising element, and an increasing range of available appliances for institutional scale electric cooking. There are also challenges to navigate, namely upfront costs. Kitchen cook staff may be unfamiliar with electric cooking and need training to help them to use new technologies, and of course the reliability of their local electricity supply. But these opportunities for school electric cooking have also been supported by momentum around the sector. So that's momentum generated by expanding electricity access, and also momentum through integrating electric cooking within electricity access initiatives such as Mission 300. There's also momentum around recent multilateral collaborations, such as at COP30, the platform for clean cooking in schools was announced, and also the recent $80 million school meals accelerator. So to support these opportunities in school electric cooking, MECS has developed various resources, and including recently the MECS School e-cook transitions guidelines, which will be the focus of this talk. So why was it developed? Perhaps this is like maybe the key takeaway here is it was developed because schools vary enormously. They vary in terms of the size, the number of students, the menu, the cooking practices, and the infrastructure within the school. So that's, for example, the kitchen space, the electricity infrastructure, and potential the upgrade requirements for schools. And so therefore designing an e-cooking solution requires detailed knowledge of the target school. So this is where the guidelines come in to help provide this detailed knowledge. And they provide a suggested sequence of 8 stages for designing an e-cooking solution at school. It may be that in all cases you may not need to use all 8 stages, but there are 8 suggested stages. These guidelines also provide a list of e-cooking appliances available to raise awareness of the choice available at the moment. As you can see from the title of the document, they were developed from East Africa Learning, but they have applicability beyond and have been used in places such as Zambia and Nepal. Something to bear in mind in terms of limitations, it's important to consider the wider contextual situation, and this is something the guidelines don't cover. So this includes things like the policy environment, stakeholder interests and agendas, and it's also important, particularly e-cooking, to make sure that there is coordination with the utility on things such as local reliability of supply and any planned upgrades by the utility. So the first phase of designing the e-cooking solution for a school involves assessment and planning, and there's 3 suggested phases here. It's recommended to carry out a pre-feasibility study to support selection of target schools for a potential e-cooking transition. And that feasibility study is based on key criteria such as menu types, the size of the school, the infrastructure that the school has in terms of electricity. To do this, it's recommended to visit the site, but it may be possible to do this using already available information. With selected schools, it is then recommended to follow up with a far more detailed inception survey. And this goes into much more detail on the cooking practices, so things like the cooking fuels, the kitchen processes, the service times, the sequences, the weights, the quantities, the pot sizes used, the kitchen layout. Goes into analysis of the infrastructure, so the electricity infrastructure, the wiring, the circuit, the metering, etc., and also looks into behavioural elements, school readiness and motivation, etc. So the methods to do that is on-site surveys with schools, with the school management, the cooks, and ideally with an electrician. It's then suggested to carry out a baseline cooking study, and this is to record data on the existing fuel consumption, equipment, and the kitchen routines at the school to establish cost, time, and energy benchmarks. And that's useful for comparison with the later transition phase data once electric cooking has been introduced, and also for future carbon crediting purposes. To do this, so it involves recording energy measurements, and so what's suggested is to carry out 3 energy measurements of the most common dishes and 3 total daily fuel measurements. The reason for 3 is to improve accuracy. And in addition, it's recommended to carry out a cooking diary, or you could call this a kitchen record if you like, which captures things like the cooking sequences, the precise quantities of ingredients used, the pots used, and it's really important for selecting an electric cooking appliance in the next phase. So the next phase concerns the design and installation of the e-cooking solution and the later training of staff for it. And so the design, it should be based on stages 1 to 3, and the data from stages 1 to 3, and should consider the cooking needs, the kitchen space, the electricity infrastructure. The installation will involve procurement and installation of appliances, and may involve kitchen or electricity infrastructure upgrades, and it's recommended to engage school stakeholders in the process from the start to improve agency and ownership. Training is particularly important, so training of the cooks who may not have had experience of using the cooking appliances before, and so there needs to be adequate time and space made for knowledge transfer and alignment between the e-cooking appliance experts, so the project developers, and the food experts, so the cooks, the school cooks. For example, an EPC may use cooking with electric pressure cooker, is likely to use less water than cooks may be familiar with. At the same time, project developers may not be familiar with local ingredients and may need to make adjustments to the recommendations they make in terms of cooking on that basis. So it may need a process of repetition with the trainers and cooks to get things ready before going live at school. And it's recommended that, well, there's two options. You can either do this training live during school days, but that's quite high risk in case something doesn't quite go right and you've got a lot of kids to feed, or at another allocated time before going live. And probably a combination of both is recommended, doing it before and then accompanying cooks during the first live week. So once the e-cooking appliances are installed and the training has been carried out, it's recommended to monitor the electric cooking, to evaluate how the transition has gone in terms of time savings, fuel use, costs, how kitchen staff have adapted, and to identify and hopefully nip in the bud any potential initial challenges. So the method for doing that is as per the baseline study. So you would record energy measurements and kitchen processes, but this time it would be for the new e-cooking appliances, and you would record energy measurements using either an integrated meter or an external meter. And that's recommended to do immediately after the introduction of e-cooking for 2 weeks. The next suggested monitoring phase occurs 4 to 6 weeks after the electric cooking introduction, again for 2 weeks. It's the same process as in stage 6, and it's about understanding longer term uptake. What is perhaps particularly interesting to note here is whether there's been any reverting to previous cooking fuels and methods by the staff. And if that has been the case, to understand why, to address any challenges that may be suggested by that reversion, and also to record energy data for any baseline fuels that have been reverted to. Lastly, in terms of monitoring, it's suggested to carry out a follow-up survey 3 months after the e-cooking introduction. So this is a qualitative survey with school management, the kitchen staff, and to understand their user experience and any further challenges, and just to get a sense of overall sustainability. As mentioned at the start, the guidelines also contain a list of institutional e-cooking appliances available, and that's just to raise awareness of the choice available. So on the screen you can see a selection from the guidelines, and it covers key details. Particularly important detail is probably the maximum capacity in terms of people that can be served per full pot. So it gives an indication of what type of institution the appliance may be suitable, what type of school the appliance may be suitable in terms of school size. The appliances on the left are for smaller institutions, and on the right for appliances for larger institutions. So these guidelines are not just on paper, but they've also been applied. So examples of their application include ongoing work by MECS. It's called a series of studies called the School Kitchen and Cooking Studies, or SCAC studies, which the aim of is to get baseline energy measurements in 6 countries in Africa and Asia. And so the guidelines informed the development of the SCAC's protocol. The guidelines have also been used to inform the MECS demonstrators in Uganda and Tanzania. So the MECS demonstrators are FCDO country office supported scale-up initiatives that have various components. Both of the demonstrators have a school cooking focus, where the guidelines have come in. They've also been used to contribute to the development of the CLASP-authored handbook under the partnership between Efficiency of Access and MECS, as you can see on the screen. So this is a handbook for the deployment of institutional e-cookers, focusing on deployment and scale. And just to give a bit of a heads up about future work, for MECS in this area. So in the near future, be assessing the results from both the demonstrators and SCAC studies. The Uganda demonstrator is in the process of receiving an extension, and within that, there will be exploration of a carbon finance model for schools. So on the screen are some of the links that I've been making reference to during the presentation. These slides, I believe, will be shared afterwards, so these are for your access. Just wanted to flag up the third one there, which is a Lancet paper that put out last year. Draws on 4 case studies in Kenya, Lesotho, Guinea, and Nepal. And I think it highlighted the feasibility of electric cooking solutions and the broader sustainability benefits that the electric cooking in for school meals can provide. Just to give you an example of some of the data from that project, one of the 4 case studies was in Nepal. It was under the World Food Programme Green School Kitchen Programme. On the screen, I won't go into all the details, but there are various sustainability benefits in terms of reduced baseline fuel use, cost savings, reduced firewood collection times. Interestingly, it was an integrated solution, so both a solar PV system and induction stoves were introduced at the same time, and this enabled some circular economy benefits, such as the surplus power being used, well, sometimes being sold to the grid, sometimes being used for other school electricity needs, such as lighting, and in some cases surplus power was used to irrigate school gardens, with then some of the food produce from those gardens then going into the school meals. The picture on screen is an example of that. I think overall the paper supports the conclusion that e-cooking for school meals offers multiple sustainability benefits, and also supports the rationale for these guidelines. There were unique contexts in each of the schools, within each of the 4 case studies, and emphasises that schools need to be understood and assessed on a case-by-case basis, which these guidelines facilitate. That's everything. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you. And just some links of the MECS work and the Edson Fund.
Thank you so much, Richard. It was a very interesting presentation, and I guess you bring some light one of the biggest challenges that usually we identify, because we see that understand the available solutions. It's one of the key barriers for clean cooking in schools, and I think this can bring some light on that. Of course, does not cover all the technologies and all the options, but it's a very comprehensive, and when you're looking specifically on e-cooking, and it's also show if we're looking for other solutions, what needs to be done, what kind of work and the steps that need to be done also to consider that. And also another element that's actually another barrier that usually we identify, it's the cost of acquiring appropriate solutions. And as you show, there is a lot of benefits when look on this cost, but we need to have a program and need to design and think this through. And this, I guess, help us to connect with our next speakers, Justine Abuga, which is looking from the private sector, right? Which cost and how to finance and the business model, it will be very important. So please welcome Justine from Ecobora, showing the experience on deploying cooking in Kenya.
Yeah, thank you very much, Michelle. Could you please share my presentation?
There we are. Let's put it full screen right now.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
So very welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name again is Justin Abuga. I'm the business lead at the Ecobora company based out of Nairobi, Kenya. And what we do, we manufacturing electrical stoves for schools. So today I will share with you our learnings and the strategies we've been trying to take as a business to try and scale electrical cooking in schools in Kenya and East Africa. Next slide. Yeah, just to paint this context, which I think is much familiar to everybody. In sub-Saharan Africa, we consuming more than 7.5 million tons of food per year to feed our students. So these are very alarming and also very expensive for these users, particularly school teachers or school managers, to feed these students, and even those who are running these school feeding programs. It's very expensive, besides being an environmental hazard due to the emissions levels and deforestation levels. That's why I'm to my next slide. That's why, as I mentioned, at Ecobora, we've come up with a solution. Our solution works in 4 simple steps. The first step is the solar panels to capture the sun's energy. The second step is the inverters. And the third step is the lithium batteries, whereby we store this energy for rainy days, cloudy days, or during our night cooking hours, because some schools do host students, so they have to prepare food overnight. And my last step in this solution is on my next slide. Yep. This is another configuration, again, of different brands, different types of inverters, and different types of batteries, lithium batteries for storage and converting power from DC to AC, which is very critical, as we will share later down the slides. Yeah, and the last most critical part of all these components is the stove. This stove is on the far right of the picture, and these are very intentional picture because as you can see, power from the sun can be harnessed, captured, and be converted into thermal energy. This thermal energy we can use to cook for students in schools with 0 CO2 emission levels. As I mentioned, since we storing this energy, this AC power can be also used for productive use in schools. For example, lighting classrooms is very important, powering computer labs, water pumping from boreholes, just to name a few, because all these factors are very critical in running this energy balance in a school setup. On my next slide. Yeah, so what's very key is understanding the various parameters for successful scale-up or deployment of these solutions. So one key is power source. So some areas are off-grid. In that scenario, you're forced to do solar cooking. In some scenarios, there's grid. Such scenarios, you're forced to do grid or an hybrid system, combining solar and the grid. So that's very important, understanding the power source, availability of that school or that community. Yeah, the second part is the pot sizes or stove sizes. Schools are different sizes in terms of population, in terms of dishes or diets, in terms of cultures. So that's very important when you're trying to design a stove for these users. So like in Ecobora, we make stoves ranging from 50 liters all the way to 2,000 liters, which means that we can serve from 50 students to 7,000 students per day in one setup. So understanding the pot size is very critical because you don't want to change the user's habits. Some kitchens are already built, they're fixed. You can't bring a bigger pot or a smaller pot. So I think that's very important, understanding the pot sizes and having flexibility to ensure you as a provider or a manufacturer, you meet these demands, unique demands from users. And the last bit of this Ecobora solution is a smart monitoring system. So this involves a smart meter installed in these devices, which I think is very important to ensure we have digital meters, not only supporting the users, but also supporting you as the manufacturer to even preempt repair and maintenance whenever they happen. On to my next slide. Yeah, so this shows you how transformational electric cooking can be it solar or grid in a school kitchen. As you can see in that image, as a user, experience cooking in the kitchen. So ideally, from the user side, there's changes, and these users can adapt if trained and supported. So this just to bring the point that beyond making the stoves, beyond installing the stoves, beyond all those studies, the users should be central. And these are the school cooks in this transition for a successful scale up. Because We have different appliances working differently in the various dishes or menus. So we need to ensure these users, school cooks, understand, and are also in the forefront of championing for transition from biomass to electric cooking. On to my next slide. Yeah, so this slide shows one of our schools in Bomet County in Kenya. It's a solar powered school. We did this school with the Rockefeller Foundation in partnership and MECS. So it's very different. And this slide brings an opportunity and a challenge at the same time, in that for us to change into e-cooking, the biggest challenge you've been facing, as at least with the Ecobora's experience, is lack of school kitchen infrastructure. E-cooking appliances can never be on an open space. Can never be. You need a kitchen. That's the sad story or reality. You need a proper kitchen with proper wiring for safety users, because when you say electric, that's power. You need to ensure the users are safe in that space. So one thing we have seen is schools are lacking proper kitchens. That's the biggest challenge we're seeing. And for us to transition in a scale-up mass, we need to refocus how can we support schools to have better kitchens? How can we have drawings or architectural designs given to schools, given to governments, which can be adapted for these new kitchens building, which ensures that when people like Ecobora come on place to transition them, we reduce the cost of the project, which is really a big budget in terms of civil works and repairs. And we have seen many schools unable to transition because they lack this simple infrastructure, a kitchen, a very simple kitchen, which can accommodate transition, both solar or grid cooking. The other point about this picture in a kitchen, if it's a grid school, we have seen governments like our government in Kenya rolling out last mile connectivity, a very good initiative. The challenge is that when they're doing this connectivity in schools, the power drop line is dropped in the gate or the teacher's office, and the kitchen is meters away from this drop line. So when we come in trying to transition them to e-cooking, the biggest challenge comes, how can we get power from the drop line to the kitchen 500 meters down the line? When you do the math, $10,000 of upgrades, and this really becomes a barrier for adoption. So we think, and we advise, and we recommend, whenever schools are trying to be connected to grid, last mile connectivity, let's try to take power to the kitchen. This way, we are taking away 70% of the burden to the users when time comes to transition. On to my next slide. Yeah, this is very important. We're talking about the African market. Each market, each country, each region has their own culture, different foods. They prefer them in a certain way. That's the reality. So we have to really understand this as manufacturers and as promoters of e-cooking technologies. So like in Ecobora's cook stove, we've been able to really figure this out because the stove can be able to do steaming, frying, and even boiling. So this allows you to provide dishes or cook menus which are different. Because again, if you go to a school, it's hard for you to say this stove is only used for boiling, and then ask them to buy a new stove for frying or a new stove for steaming. It becomes difficult to transition them. So having technologies which are agnostic and robust in a way that you're maintaining not only the taste of the food, but also ensuring the schools menus or that does not change. I think that's very critical to bring to this conversation. Yep, on to my next slide. So what you're seeing here in this picture is a pellet stove, wood pellet stove made from bioresource. We're doing this as Ecobora in collaboration with Renetech and the World Bioenergy Association, whereby the reality of grid cooking, but at least from my country, is very reliable. When you're going to schools, these students will never miss a meal. So that's why, as Ecobora, through our partners, we've designed this pellet cook stove, which acts as a backup. And this backup is very important, which is now comes to my next slide. Hybrid cooking. For us to do grid cooking, we can never run away from hybrid cooking, because the biggest challenge has been from our side. When you go to a school, you say, can I sell you a grid cooking stove? The first question they ask you, what happens when power goes off? That's a very difficult question to answer, more so as a teacher. And as I mentioned, you can never miss cooking food in a school, whatsoever the reason is. And that's why, as I mentioned, combining pellet stove and these solar stoves from Ecobora, we're able to provide this called an hybrid system, which ensures that we can transition. Because at the end of the day, if you bring them a solution and they can't cook with it, they go back to their old habits. So I think rethinking solutions with a hybrid is very important, more so for grid cooking, and specifically for those schools which can never use solar cooking, because with solar cooking, the batteries and inverters have a huge capital expense for them to afford. So that's why I think it is very important to ensure we don't give them reasons to go back to their old ways. On to my next slide. Having said that, data is very important. Many times, this data is majorly consumed by the manufacturers, policymakers, and all that. Like in Ecobora, we've now designed our own platform called Emissionify, which we get data from these stoves. But into my next slide, what's very important on my next slide is data for the users, not only for the carbon developers, for the users. And these I mean the school manager and the school cook. Data which is very simple, like what you see in this chart. It tells the user, like today, you've only spent 8.1 kilowatt hours of energy, and you took 2 hours of cooking. So if you speak these two simple metrics, speaks the user's language and the teacher's language. And these are very important because the teacher or the manager is able to calculate the cost of cooking. And the user is able to understand, am I saving time in that sense? How can I prepare and plan my cooking schedules? So we also need to ensure this data is palatable and accessible to the users in those schools. Otherwise, if there's no data, they can't really make decisions. They can't see savings and they can't make decisions. To my next slide. Yeah, just again to make this more exciting, we can never scale e-cooking in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, if we don't think about local manufacturing or local assembly. Because as one company as Ecobora, we can do too much. We can never reach all the schools in Africa. We need to find ways to support local manufacturers like Ecobora. Local manufacturers like ESMAP will require special and patient capital for us to be able to ensure we do quality production, leverage economies of scale, and be able to scale up. And this way, we'll be able to provide supply. There's demand. If there's no supply, we cannot scale e-cooking in sub-Saharan Africa. So these two things has to meet hand in hand. Yeah. And to my next slide, we need the youths and the women behind this movement. Because for us to scale e-cooking, we need fabricators, we need welders, we need people who help us with artisans, with repair and maintenance in those communities across regions. So we feel like there's a gap, and we think if for us to really take this full-fledged, we need to really rethink about uplifting skills in youth and women. These are the people who will be able to support this movement, just like the way the solar movement did. Having skilled labor in those communities is the first step of really bringing change. And for cooking, we need these people, youth and women, in manufacturing, repair and maintenance in those communities. Yeah. My next slide. Yeah, I think my previous presenter mentioned about a cookbook report. So MECS and CLASP last year presented and printed a report, and this just helping, like a user step-by-step user guide, helping during deployment of these solutions. This report, as you can see, it was called Making the Switch Deployment Handbook. I think it's very important for not only for the users, but also for the manufacturers, because doing feasibility study in schools across the country is very expensive and time consuming. So having this kind of guide, which gives you an overview of the state of the school in a country, in a region, giving a step-by-step guide to do accessibility, planning, installation, and commissioning is very important for a successful deployment. And lastly, this book, I think, presents an opportunity to scale adoption for e-cooking as it becomes a blueprint for users and even policymakers to even adapt when they're trying to shift from biomass cooking. I will share the link in the group in case you want to get your hands on this report. to my next slide, to the most interesting part, the business. So at the end of the day, we can have the stuff, there's demand, there's supply. If there's no sustainability, then there's no scale up, there's no business. And I'll just show or present what Ecobora we are doing and what has been working for us currently. What you've discovered, these schools are very different, even if they're government schools. They have different regions and they have different capitation from the government. And they have different needs. And that's why we will present three models. Two of them are working. The last one we are trying to implement it. And the first one, as you can see, is some of the schools we require to pay a fixed deposit. And then the remaining balance is paid after installation. And notably, you can see such kind of engagement, they have a huge customer acquisition cost. That's one barrier because of this background of feasibility, assessment, renovations involved in transitioning. Yeah. So one is upfront payment. On to my next slide. Some schools you can do cooking as a service. These are the schools which you think are less risky in terms of their financial capabilities. So this whereby you allow them to redirect their timely budgets to repay for these infrastructures. This works well because there's zero initial capex. The challenge is, as a manufacturer, you need to have the capex in your books to be able to deploy this for mass. As the challenge. And again, notably, there's huge customer acquisition cost for the obvious reasons. To my last business model. My next, yeah. So this is another model which we think can work. And this involves the school paying 33.3% of the total cost. And now the challenge is this pegs on two variables which we can't control. The first one's an RBF or a subsidy. And the last one is carbon financing. So this means that it takes away 2/3 of the burden of the user of the school from accessing. Very lucrative, but again, as I mentioned, it depends on very uncontrollable variables, which the school can control, the manufacturer can't control. So again, those are just three models which can be used to run a business. The first two are working for us. The last one, not yet, because as I mentioned, of those two variables which we can control. To my next slide. Yeah, having said that, we've seen success in e-cooking. As Ecobora, we have customers in Kenya, Somalia, and Uganda, and growing. So there's demand, there's opportunities, cross borders, and there's demand. But now we need to find ways to create collaborations and create local capacity building in those countries, in those markets, to adapt e-cooking. On to my next slide. Yeah, that was my last slide. Welcome comments, questions in the chat. But thanks for listening to me. And that has been our story as Ecobora. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Justin. It's so interesting, and especially in the end where you bring this idea of how we can be sustainable and how we can actually make it work. So it's very impressive, and also it's important to see the expected outcomes, like the access to renewables, because you show that how it's done, and also the potential generation of megawatts of power, kilowatts of power, and the creation of the green jobs. I think I really want to also underline that. That's a very interesting, and how it can be scale up for the continent. I think that's also important. And I want to mention the carbon part of it that you mentioned as also as an opportunity, as an outcome, but also a way to make this business model more sustainable, more scale up, and to bring the positive health outcomes that maybe it's also another opportunity that maybe we can bring to this kind of business models to scale up and more. And I want to finalize one of the key outcomes that I thought it was very interesting is the part of the digitalization, the smart metering. I think that's a very interesting, as you said, to people to have the data, and also because knowing the data, knowing the cost, it's also something that could be related with regulation and tariff design, because if you see the load you show, it can be a time where the electricity is less, costly less. So I think all these elements can be put together. So I really appreciate your presentation. But you brought some a good point in terms of challenge, that one of the biggest challenges you see is the kitchen. They need to be ready for the technology, right? It's not just about, and then I think it links very well with our next two presentations that Sarika and Clementine after will be talking about the operation challenge and how they are actually promote these programs. And we have been seeing also in the case we're looking the same challenge and how we need to build an integrated project that actually allow us to take a look not just on the cooking, but also to solve the cooking as a broader sense. So I would love to invite Sarika to talk a little bit about the Ghana program and tell us how they are seeing it and how they design and they starting to implement it. Thank you so much, Sarika, for being here with us.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for the introduction, and of course to the whole ESMAP team for inviting me to share on behalf of our entire social policy team in Ghana our experience with working to bring clean cook stoves to the Ghana school feeding program. Sorry, I'm trying to get my slides to move. Oh, here we go. So in today's brief presentation, I'll just quickly share with you an overview of our safety net project and our partnership with ESMAP on Clean Cook under this project. And then I'll go into more details of how we've gone about with the actual implementation of the Clean Cook Stove pilot in selected schools and what we're looking ahead for in terms of next steps. So just to give an overview, the Ghana Productive Safety Net Project, GPSMP2, is a 5-year, $250 million operation that supports the government in expanding and enhancing social safety nets that aim to improve incomes and productivity of the poor in Ghana. So that's kind of the objective of the overarching project. It's a very large project. It has many components. You can see there's 6 here, but all I want to highlight today is the fact that the Ghana School Feeding Program is one of the safety nets that's supported under this project, and it is in fact the largest safety net program in Ghana. It plays a very important role in ensuring food security and nutrition for children among the poorest and most vulnerable households in Ghana. And it's a very large-scale program. So it covers over 13,000 schools across the country, serving over 4 million children. And the mandate is for each of these children to receive 1 hot meal per school-going day in the year, which is about 200 instructional school-going days in the year. So in terms of the ESMAP partnership, when GPSMP2 brought school feeding on under its mandate, we also received a $2.5 million co-financing from the ESMAP team to support specifically the installation of clean cook stoves on a pilot basis in selected GSFP schools, targeting those in low-income districts. So why was this initiative brought about? Well, during the initial scoping that was done when we were bringing school feeding under our project, it was apparent that the cooking systems actually used to prepare meals were often inefficient and environmentally harmful, which also has health implications, of course, on those who are preparing the meals and those who are, in the vicinity and receiving the meals. So in terms of who prepares the meals, there's a lot of workers who stand to benefit from better environmentally friendly cooking solutions. So we have about 50,000 cooks that are employed under the school feeding program, and they're overseen by over 14,000 small women-led businesses, or who we call the caterers. And their mandate is to prepare and serve these school meals. Sometimes they do it on site, using sometimes inefficient cooking methods like you can see in this picture, which also cause a lot of pollution and have health risks for those preparing the meals. There's also sometimes when there's no facilities at the school to prepare the meals, they might actually prepare them at home and then they have to transport the meals to the school, which also creates issues with keeping the meals warm, keeping them hygienic, all of those things. So there was a lot of challenges that could potentially be overcome if we could bring clean cook stoves to the schools and have them on site for the caterers and the cooks to utilize. And so essentially the ESMAP Clean Cook pilot aims to mitigate exactly those challenges, the negative environmental and health impacts of these low efficiency stoves by introducing more fuel efficient stoves that are still suited to low conditions for 2,000 school feeding schools. So the scope of the pilot is not all 13,000 schools, but it was agreed that it would be initially in 2,000 of the schools. And here you can see the pictures of the types of clean cook stoves that are viable in the context that we're talking about, which is remote, low income areas in Ghana where there isn't electricity connection. There often isn't even a gas connection. So while LPG is one of the front runners for the schools, whenever we do have gas, we also do have to rely on charcoal and firewood. So the idea is to use improved models of these stoves, even the firewood and charcoal, so that the emissions remain below a certain threshold. And so all of the stoves that will be introduced to these schools on this pilot basis, they do have to pass a minimum emission testing. And the stoves that will be brought upon this pilot will basically provide safer, more environmentally friendly cooking for over 4,000 caterers in these 2,000 schools, most of which are women, and also serving about 450,000 children. ESMAP also provided, in addition to the the 2.5 million that went to the government to implement the Clean Cook Stove pilot, they also provided $300,000 of BETF funding to our task team, the social policy task team that's leading this project, to allow us to provide more hands-on technical support to the client and also innovation as needed to support them in rolling out this Clean Cook Stove pilot, because it was very new for many of us. And so now I'm just going to talk through a little bit more detail how we've been able to utilize some of the BETF funds and work with the client on preparing to launch this pilot. So first, I want to really highlight that this has been very much a collaborative effort. The Clean Cook Stove pilot work that we're doing with the ESMAP funding has many stakeholders involved who are working together as a joint task force to implement. So from the World Bank side, we have, of course, the social policy task team. We manage and oversee all the grant activities and provide technical assistance as needed to the client. We also are really grateful that we have the energy team of the World Bank, the Ghana World Bank energy team also working closely with us to provide specifically clean cook stove expertise and other forms of technical assistance to the client as we roll out this pilot. From the government side, then we have the Ghana School Feeding Program team, of course, because the pilot goes under their program, so they have to actually implement all of the activities. And then we also have the labor intensive public works team, which the LIPW team. And LIPW is another program that's financed under the overarching GPSNP2 project. And what we're doing is we're doing this very interesting collaboration where the LIPW program is going to hire laborers to build mini kitchens or mini protective structures around each of these 2,000 cook stoves once they're delivered to the schools, so that these cook stoves aren't just prone to weather damage or other types of issues, theft or any sort of wear and tear that could happen if they were just in the open air. So we're actually utilizing another program under our project to make sure that there's some sustainability of these stoves over time by protecting them with a mini kitchen. The joint task force, we had a lot of implementation questions that we had to answer from the get-go when we were tasked with implementing this Clean Cook Stove pilot. Many of us were new to the Clean Cook Stove space, and we also had a limited number of schools that we could cover right out of the full program. So we had to ask ourselves, which districts and schools should be the ones who are prioritized to receive these 2,000 Clean Cook Stoves. What kinds of clean cook stoves are even available in Ghana? Which vendors provide them? Can they be provided in a bulk, through a bulk order? Can they be delivered and installed in these very remote rural areas, outside of Accra? We also had to understand which clean cooking fuels are readily accessible in the schools that we're targeting, which again are more remote rural areas, to make sure that we're matching the right type of stove with the right school, and we're not giving all schools LPG stoves when half of them don't even have access to gas, for example. And then finally, once all the stoves are selected and procured and installed, we had to figure out how do we protect them from weather damage? How do we ensure that they're sustainably used over time? And some of this, I've already alluded to, but here you can kind of see several steps that we've taken over the last 2 years against these resources to really systematically the questions that I just highlighted on the previous slide. So from March 2024 through February 2026, we've done several types of studies and analyses to make sure we're, trying to do due diligence in how we're approaching this pilot. So the first thing that we did was a cook stove vendor mapping. So we engaged a clean cook stove expert in Ghana, who was introduced to us through the energy team to do a comprehensive market analysis to assess what kind of clean cook stoves are even available, what are the potential suppliers for these stoves, how much do they cost, how large are they, or how many burners do they have, all the different things that you need to do. What are the maintenance costs? Can they be delivered? Can they be installed? Can they be done in bulk order? All of these different things that we needed to know to make sure this was even a viable approach. So we started with the vendor mapping, and there was like a very comprehensive report put together with that. And then once we felt comfortable that yes, indeed, there are cook stoves available in Ghana that are clean cook stoves that can be, ordered in bulk, then we continued with the next steps. So one important thing was selecting the schools to actually receive these cook stoves. So we did this very systematically. We did a district poverty analysis. So we used data from the Ghana Statistical Service to ensure that the schools that were shortlisted for being selected for this pilot are actually among the poorest districts in Ghana, but also using, maintaining regional representation. So once we had shortlisted schools, we shortlisted about 2,500 schools because we wanted to overshoot because we knew we would have to narrow down eventually. So we shortlisted to 2,500 schools based on this district poverty analysis. And then we moved to the next step, which was a school level survey with these 2,500 schools to understand very specifically for each school, what kind of fuel do they have available in their communities? What kind of current cook stove methods are they using? What facilities are available on site in those schools? Which one and what are not? Are caterers making meals at the school or at home? We are trying to really get very detailed contextual information from each school so that in the end, we can shortlist the 2,000 schools who are going to receive the cook stoves, but also so that we could make sure we get the right type of cook stove to each school based on what fuel they can reliably access on a regular basis. And our team, of course, provided a lot of technical support to the client in designing the instrument and also analyzing the data from it. But it was the school feeding team that actually implemented the survey, and it was done via phone. So they actually were able to get a list of all the head teachers from the Ministry of Education and their phone numbers, and it was a phone survey, which was quite successful. I think we had about 80 to 85% success rate in reaching the schools. Once we had narrowed down the schools and the types of stoves that each school would get, we also had other parallel activities going in tandem to make sure we were ready for procurement of these stoves. So one of those parallel activities was cook stove model testing. So the models that were identified from the initial vendor mapping, we wanted to make sure that they were indeed clean cook stoves by the actual scientific standard. So they were tested in a lab, an accredited lab, to make sure they passed admissions testing. And then we were able to, help write the technical specifications for the procurement to make sure that we mention in those procurement documents that any vendor that's selected has to be able to pass, their stove models has to pass this emissions testing. We also designed, in parallel to these processes, we worked with the LIPW team to design the mini kitchens that would be covering the cook stoves. And so those designs have been finalized and the budget and all of that, so they're ready to go once the cook stoves are actually installed. And finally, we're at the stage now where we're in the middle of the competitive procurement process for actually sourcing and delivering these clean cook stoves. We started this process a few months ago, so we're actually close to finalizing it and being ready to sign the award with the different vendors who will then start installing the cook stoves at the different sites, and then the LIPW team will come with building the mini kitchens. And in fact, I've jumped ahead a little, but basically just to highlight, the next steps are kind of super critical for us to complete this pilot. So between now, essentially in December of this year, we need to complete the pilot. That's when both our project and our grant, our ESMAP grant, are closing. We do feel that we're on track given the fact that procurement is complete. So the next steps, like I mentioned, are that install vendors. We will then get a PW team to build the mini kitchens as protective structures around these cook stoves. We also will utilize our partnership with the energy team and the remaining BETF resources we have to create training materials for the caterers and cooks so that they know how to use these cook stoves, they know how to maintain them, they know the best practices. So our team is working to put together those training materials, and then the school feeding team will do a training of trainers with the school feeding team, and then the school feeding team will actually roll out that training with the caterers and cooks in these 2,000 schools. And then finally, of course, before this whole pilot closes, our team wants to put together like a final kind of implementation report, which reflects the lessons learned and the challenges and how we overcame them, and just capture everything that we've done over the last 2 or 3 years so that it can be used to scale up this cook stove initiative within Ghana, but also it could be used by other teams in other countries who are wanting to do something similar, especially in a more low-income remote setting, which is what we're facing here in Ghana. And of course, throughout the next steps, there'll be a lot of monitoring and oversight, because we want to see how these stoves are being installed, how they're being delivered, how the kitchens are being built, whether they're serving their purpose, and how the trainings are rolled out. So our team, in collaboration with the government, will be doing a lot of that monitoring in the next few months. And just my last slide, just to highlight that, although we haven't gotten to like the really big part of the pilot, which is actually getting the stoves into the schools, we do feel like we've made a lot of progress, and we've done a lot of really systematic studies and analyses to make sure we're doing things in a way that hopefully leads to the best outcome possible. And that has really been facilitated by a lot of like enabling factors. One has been the early stakeholder buy-in and frequent check-ins within our joint task team, having strategic cross-sectoral collaboration, the ongoing support from the ESMAP team in the energy sector has been really crucial. The government and the bank being really proactive in navigating procurement challenges that have come up. And then finally, just having a really committed client, both the school feeding team and the LIPW team being fully committed to deliver on this pilot has been really beneficial for us. So just wanting to highlight some of these enabling factors. And that's it for my end. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sarik. It's so interesting. And I really want to underline what you mentioned, this need to combine from one side the technologies and the market analysis, and the other side the characteristic of the schools and the need to adapt the schools sometimes to receive the program. I think that's a very important lessons learned. And when you compare the technologies, there is many variables that you need to consider, right? As you said, how adapted it is, if there is full who is ready, what's the capex, what's the opex, what's ease of installation, the use, the reliability of that. That's something that also our colleague before mentioned, the safety, savings, payback periods. There is a lot of elements that we need to think when we're deciding and thinking about this technology. And depending on the program, of course, one of these elements can be more important than others. But I think from what I hear from you, and I think it's a good also link with the case of Rwanda, this combination of choosing the schools and the right technology and how you do the match, it's very crucial beyond the traditional business model, let's say for clean cooking, because there you have an installation that need to be ready for that, right? So I think that's a very good point, and I thank you so much for bringing this point up. And I use this to invite Clementine to come and talk a little bit about Rwanda, because there was this discussion about technology. There is this discussion about the adaptation of the kitchen. So very welcome. Thank you so much for being here with us, Clementine.
Thank you so much, Michelle, and a big thanks to the previous presenters. They have at least laid background on what I'm going to present, which is the experiences that Rwanda has gone through trying to implement the institutional clean cooking. So as many of you may have heard about it, at least Rwanda is known for being a leader in electrification, whereby, that's the first slide, please, whereby electricity access rate currently is at 82%. Would you move to the next slide, please? Yes, at 84.6%, and it combines both grid and off-grid, almost 60% to the grid and 25% done through off-grid solutions. Nevertheless, with that good achievement for electrification, clean cooking has lagged behind, whereby access to clean cooking energy, as by the national census done in 2022, shows that about 76% of the households are still relying on traditional biomass, especially using firewood. And the World Bank started implementing projects that support clean cooking in 2021, with the first project, which is the Rwanda Energy Access and Quality Improvement Project, which was approved in 2021, and it's closing at the end of this year. It got additional financing in 2023 to distribute clean cooking stoves to 500. So in the beginning of the project in 2021, there was a component to distribute clean cooking stove to 500,000 households. And so far, more than 500 households have been distributed with clean stoves. And of that, the majority is 92%, and LPG constitutes only 8%, and electric stoves are still very few at 1%. In 2023, the ASCEND project, which is the Accelerating Sustainable Clean Energy Access Transformation Project, was also approved and still had a component on clean cooking, and it was meant to distribute clean cooking stoves to 80,000 households. The project is still ongoing, and so far it has connected about 32,000 households. It has distributed about 32,000 stoves to households. And again, the majority of this one is 87%. This is mainly because there is no biomass. There are no biomass stoves considered under the ASCEND project. So the majority is now LPG, and electric cooking is still very small, limited. And the additional financing to the first project, which is the EKIP in 2022, was approved, and it was to install clean cooking stoves in 150 schools in Rwanda, and it's currently at an early stage of implementation. It's currently at an early stage of implementation, and yes, it's currently at an early stage of implementation, but from the procurement that has taken place, we see that LPG is again going to occupy 88%, while electric stoves will only occupy 12%. Under the ASCEND project, we also have a component on institutional clean cooking, and 60 schools are going to be installed with cooking stoves. So what's the rationale for Rwanda? Next slide, please. Rationale for Rwanda to install institutional clean cooking. One, in 2019, Rwanda adopted the National Comprehensive School Feeding Policy that was aimed for universal coverage of school meals for pre-primary to secondary schools. It targeted reducing malnutrition and improving education outcomes. To implement the school feeding policy, the government equipped schools with kitchens and cooking stoves. Rwanda has, at that time in 2019, at least when the policy was approved, had more than 8,000 pre-primary to secondary schools, and they were distributed across the country. So the vast majority of these schools rely on firewood for cooking, and the annual firewood expenditure per student per year for firewood was estimated to be around $6, and it was paid directly or indirectly through the school fees by the parents. And these schools were serving 3 meals a day for the boarding schools. A feasibility study that was funded by the EU that estimated that for about 500 institutional public boarding schools, about 70,000 tons of firewood would be burnt per cooking year, for cooking per year, and this was assuming an average of per capita consumption of firewood per day of 1.3 kilograms. And so this study suggested that this could lead to about 110,000 tons of carbon dioxide emissions per year. And so this shows that also burning firewood for cooking exacerbates deforestation in Rwanda. So therefore, it was critical in Rwanda to promote efficient and clean cooking solutions for schools to reduce the adverse impacts of relying on firewood in terms of carbon emissions and deforestation. Next slide, please. There were key challenges, at least during implementation, for school feeding. And here I'm going to talk about the energy related. My colleague, who is coming from the social protection side, had other key challenges that were considered. But coming from the energy side, the key challenge is the high upfront cost for institutional stoves for schools, switching to cleaner solutions. As I mentioned, most of these schools were using firewood, and they already had their kitchens built, they had their stoves. However efficient or inefficient they were, but switching to cleaner solutions of LPG, electric, the pellets, as were demonstrated by Ecobora, meant high upfront costs for the schools. The second challenge is that there is inadequate user capacity in stove operation. I think it was mentioned in one of the previous presentations. So the people who have been operating these kitchens, making the meals, are used to the biomass stoves, and switching to the new technologies would mean that there's need for building capacity, both to operate the stoves, maintain them, repair them for the long-term sustainability of the stoves. The third challenge is about technology development, which is still at a very nascent stage for institutional cooking. And the fourth one is it's inadequate enabling environment for institutional cooking that lacks standard procedures, testing guidelines for quality assurance, and potential for carbon credits. But luckily enough, as we've heard from the presentation from Richard, at least guidelines have been developed for e-cooking, and now schools can benefit from those ones. Next slide, please. So for the EKI project, the first project in Rwanda that is implementing institutional clean cooking, there was an initial project design. This was, of course, one of its kind project in Rwanda. It was the first one, and there was a learning curve that is still ongoing. So the additional finance to EKIP was a total of 2.85 million plus some 300,000 for TA. And this was meant to provide clean cooking stoves to 150 schools in Rwanda. That was during the initial project design while preparing the project. And the TA activity was, this TA activity was to help organize a competition for technologies that could be considered during the implementation. And there was also the TA was also supposed to cover a pilot to identify suitable cooking technologies and obtain technical performance data, user feedback, and to collect information on the operating and maintenance costs and training needs. I think these processes have also been elaborated on further by Richard in the previous presentation. Then the selection of beneficiary schools was to take into consideration the school's ability to provide the adequate O&M budgets to match the appropriate technologies based on the experience learned from the pilot. And the bidding document then would be prepared taking into consideration the results from the pilot as well as the implementation results from previous EU-funded cooking project. While doing implementation, there were some changes, and today what we have is different from what was initially thought of or designed. And this mainly came because there was a change in policy, in government policy, whereby no biomass stoves were anymore allowed in schools, given the diverse environmental impact that it has on the country and the health issues to the people using these biomass stoves. So only LPG and electric stoves were considered into the project. And this has led to a drastic reduction in the number of schools that can be covered by the project from 150 to only 35. Then I think my predecessor, the presenter just before me, mentioned about, elaborated more on the process that they've been going through, and we more or less went through the same process. And maybe one thing that we hadn't thought of at the beginning during the design of the project was the status or the availability of kitchens, given that the different schools were going to need different technologies. So construction of new kitchens was considered as part of the design of the project, I mean the revised design of the project. And then there was supposed to be a pilot phase, and it was fixed at 9 schools out of the 35 schools, once the number dropped down from 150. And unfortunately, this pilot phase was not successful. This was mainly because there were no responsive bidders who were qualified and experienced for both the construction of the kitchens and supply and installation of clean cooking technologies. This was mainly because in the design, in the drafting of the tenders, the tenders were combined. So the contractors were supposed to do both the construction of the kitchen and then the installation, supply and installation of the stoves that they would have supplied. So the first round of tendering was not successful because there are no bidders who could combine both scopes. So the tenders were split into two, to have tenders only for the construction of the kitchens, which could easily be done by local contractors who are familiar with the context of the country. And then the other tenders would be for the supply and installation of the different technologies. Next slide, please. Now, today, as we speak, the institutional cooking project in Rwanda has got all the contractors on board, and the construction of the 35 kitchens, there were 2 lots, one for 17 and the other one for 18 kitchens separately, so that they can do the implementation faster and in parallel. Then there was a contract for the supply and installation of clean cooking solutions in 2 schools using electric cooking solutions, and another contract for installation of, so there are 2 contracts, each for 2 schools, to be supplied with electric cooking solutions. And then the other contract is for the supply of LPG cooking solutions in 31 schools. So far, the first contract, which was given to the contractor for the supply of electric cooking solutions in 2 schools is completed. Unfortunately, there was a mismatch with the awarding of the contract for the construction of the kitchen. So there is a bit of a gap because the 2 schools still need the kitchens built before these stoves can be installed. And nonetheless, all the project works are expected to be completed in June of 2026. What are the lessons that we've learned from the implementation of EQIP that we are taking forward into the Ascent Rwanda? One, it's really important to include the project design. In the project design, the construction of kitchens. I think that my Ghanaian colleagues at least thought of it before, but for us, it's a lesson that we learned through the implementation. And then have an optimized size of the scope to attract more qualified and experienced bidders, because the smaller the scope is, the costly it becomes, and less qualified bidders will be interested in joining. So it's better to do a bigger scope wherever possible. Then the last one, but not least one, it is that it's better to split the offer into specific lots that can better attract more specialized bidders. This is it for Rwanda. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Clementine. I think you brought so many insights, the importance of the design, the procurement, and also something that is being discussed in the chat, actually, in the thread, the cost, the different cost and the upfront cost, and how is it important in the design and the implementation of the program. I think that's two very interesting. And when you think about the cost and it's very related also with the business model. We may be thinking about the purchase, which is mostly what we'll be seeing on the case we studied today, where we need to see the school investing or the government investing on the capex, or the institutional investing on the capex. We need to also sign operation and maintenance agreement, and also be sure that you have the right financing for these instruments in the best way. And there is room for all the discussion about the need of a concession of finance, the need of grants, and how we can close this gap. And depending on the technology, how big is this cost associated. There is other business models as well that we need to consider, and that's something that our colleague for Ecobora, actually Justin, just mentioned to us. And one that I think it's important for us to keep in mind and think, it's about the lease, different instruments that we can think about lease that can be a business model and the instrument to deal with the upfront cost in a better way, and especially if it decreases the cost in the long term, it brings sustainability, it can be a business model to be explored. And we hope that, I guess it's a quick question that's in the chat, that it's something that we're being discussed, and we'll be coming back with this discussion in the future, and we'll be working more as part of the report and the work we're doing on the research side on the outcome part, how this can also support us and decrease this upfront cost. That's something that we see and we heard from our amazing speakers today, which is a key concern. And with that, I just want to thank you everybody for being here, and also thank all the speakers for this amazing sharing of true experience and also lessons learned. That's very useful for us, and I guess it's very inspiring for us to keep moving. I would like to thank the ESMAP team and the Clean Cooking Fund to actually, and Sanan Hong that has been leading it, to lead this, which has been, I think, increasing success in number of people. And I invite you all to keep tuned, because we will have a new webinar in the next month, and that's the idea, to keep the series. So with that, and with 1 minute late, I thank you so much for being here and being part of this community and being the discussion in the chat. That has been very amazing. So thank you all.